shot him, killed him when he come rolling down into a shell hole where several of us had been taking cover. Start with, it was any place you were there, you were subject to being killed. I lost 3 good buddies. One instance where I was right in the line of this Jap that come out at night.
Hello, my name is Sergeant Martinez with the United States Marine Corps. I am honored to present the story of a World War II Marine. His true story will make you realize how fortunate we are for the brave veterans and active duty members protecting this nation and our allies.
Well, hello there. My full name is Wilbur R. Gropp, G-R-O-P-P. December 7th, 1941. I was coming back home from Sunday school, and we heard of Pearl Harbor being bombed. I didn't have any idea where Pearl Harbor was, but we found out it was the Japanese had attacked our base, naval base in Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, island of Oahu. Knew I was going to go in the service, but I did work for a while as a welder in the Kaiser shipyards in Vancouver, Washington. And while there, I had a fellow that I roomed with from Montana. He said, let's go join the Marines. And I really never thought about it, but we did go down, and funny thing, why, he was a big husky guy, and they turned him down, but they took me. Of course, I was in pretty good shape too, though, at that time. So that's how I got into the Marine Corps. That was in 1943. I was 19, not quite 20 yet. Well, when I got to boot camp, we were issued a bucket with our utensils that we needed to get by with, and of course we turned our civilian clothes in and got our dungarees that we were issued, and we had a drill instructor that was a wonderful man. His name was Bettis, and boy, when he said something, why, we jumped. And he was a very tough but fair person. And we went through all kinds of training, and it was a good thing. Our hair was cut off. You couldn't, well, they took a razor to it is what they did. We were up very early every morning. We did our marching, physical activities, bayonet practice, where we'd lunge at a dummy with our rifles and the bayonets on. We would, well, it was tough training. It actually was, and I was in pretty good physical shape, but I think that helped me a lot with my physical being. After boot camp in San Diego and our training in Camp Pendleton, we shipped to the big island of Hawaii. Went over on an old, we called it a banana boat. It was a George F. Elliott. And we moved to Camp Tarawa. We had lots of bivouac training in Hawaii. We were taken out in rubber boats and with our gear on. I can remember one time I got dumped in, and with all my gear, made it to shore though. We had an Amtrak unit that was stationed on or training on the beach as well, and they would just go in one direction and then make a complete 90-degree turn with a bunch of dogs chasing them. And one time I remember this one dog didn't make it out from under got his leg chopped off, so he disappeared. But in a few weeks, why, we were down there again, and here this old three-legged dog was running around chasing the Amtrak. So that was one experience. But no, we had, I'm trying to think of most of our training was out on the bivouac and out in the fields. I was a company armor, that was my job. I had charge of the company weapons. I had to keep track of them and know everybody that had what they had. And with our signal company, mostly we just had most of us carried a M1 carbine. Okay, well, when we completed our training in Hawaii, and of course we didn't know where we were heading for. I didn't anyway. Some people, I guess, knew that we were going into combat. I left there on the USS Duel. We met on the 19th of February offshore to prepare for the landing on Iwo Jima, which we thought would be a piece of cake because it had been bombed for, I think, 90 days prior to the time we got there. I didn't have any record of the time we landed, I don't think, but one of the other fellows in my company kept a record, and he said we landed at 14:30 on the 19th at Iwo Jima, and it was, by that time, why, it was a lot of artillery fire and mortars from the Japanese, yeah. It was pretty much hell. It was a lot of dead Marines and a lot of dead Japanese, not more Marines that I saw. And well, it's something I just never did care to think back about. I know we had a chaplain going through with a bag that was picking up body parts, and well, I had sand that was blown into my legs from the shells that hit, so they were very close. It was, and of course you can't hardly dig into that darn sand anyway. We went up the beach and just crossed, well, we were pretty much on the beach the first day. And then our unit crossed over the small part of the island. And it was sad because most of the Marines we saw, most of the dead were Marines. When we first landed, I landed on Red Beach 1, which is the second beach, as I recall, up from Mount Suribachi. And the 28th Marines went up Suribachi, and they took care of the Japanese that were there. Well, that was great for us because on the 23rd day, I think it was the fourth day after we landed, I believe it was February the 23rd, they planted the flag up on Suribachi. And we heard the cheering, and I didn't see it go up, but I saw it afterward. There was a lot of cheering, and to me it meant that we wouldn't have the firing from the mountain on us. It would only be coming in from the other end of the island. So that was That was great, because there wasn't any place on the island that you were safe. There was artillery and mortars from all over. To start with, it was any place you were there, you were subject to being killed. I lost 3 good buddies that were not in my company, but they were fellow armorers, and that I went to school with. Yeah, it's thinking back, it's not a pleasant situation, but fortunately, they took care of the Japanese, and I don't know. I did about a lot of things while I was there. As far as being in signal company, I worked with the wire platoon, helping lay wire. I worked with the radio platoon, that moving equipment. We had big radio equipment. In fact, one instance, we'd moved this big PBX radio closer to where our company was stationed, and we hadn't got out of there, and within a very short time, a huge shell landed in the shell that we'd been in before, so we were pretty fortunate there. I worked loading ammunition onto the carriers that took it to the front lines. In fact, I worked with a man, John Haddix. John got the Silver Star for his duties because he ran the equipment to the front lines. And that was, and I'm trying to think what else I did. I went into a couple of caves. The Japanese had they were actually all around us, but we didn't know it. They were underground. And they also had 15 or 55-gallon barrels that they would put down vertical, and then they would have 2 of them connected horizontal, and they would have a few supplies and whatnot, and the barrel on top would have brush on it, so you couldn't see it. You wouldn't know it was there. I had one instance where I was right in the line of this Jap that come out at night, and of course at night, we had flares going all the time. It wasn't what I expected. We had a big loudspeaker that directed people what to do, and we had flares going quite frequently so you could see. And this one Japanese had come out of that small 50 barrels, and he was loaded with hand grenades and weapons, and he was coming to where several of our company was, and one of the Navajo code talkers shot him, killed him, and he come rolling down into a shell hole where several of us had been taking cover. It was, I don't know. Anybody on the island at that time was subject to getting hit. In fact, we had a ammunition dump blow up one time, and I was fairly close to it, and a piece of burning debris fell on my back, and I was just very shallow foxhole because the ground was hot because of the sulfur. I guess that's why you could just dig in the sand. But anyway, I didn't move, and I got quite a burn on the back of my back that I carried for a long time. Trying to think of I helped a fellow that had been, I guess he was shell-shocked from being by the artillery, and I got him down to the aid station, man from our company. I also carried four of us carried a wounded Japanese back to headquarters for intelligence, I should say, and never knew what happened to him, but he had a bullet hole in him and was still alive when we got him there. One fellow had one corner of the stretcher, kept dropping it, and the old Jap would roll off. We'd get him back on, and that wasn't a good situation. Just being in signal company, we weren't on the front line. That was what probably kept me from being clobbered. The ratio was like 1 out of 3 was either killed or wounded, and I was one of the lucky ones. There was a huge sulfur pit that had caves that went in vertical from the sides of the pit, and they'd taken some people out. I didn't know they were Koreans at the time, but they were Korean laborers. So I don't know what they done with them, took them as prisoners, I guess. But I did go into one of the small caves. It was so small that all I could do was just worm my way into it with my rifle or my carbine ahead of me. And then it opened up where you could almost stand up in it. But it was a sleeping quarters for both the Japanese and I guess the Koreans stayed in there too, because I know we got somebody got the Koreans out of there. But and I went in partially into another cave further up the island, but the flamethrowers had been in, and they dumped pretty well closed it off. But the thing of it is, with their caves on the island, they were all connecting. We'd had flamethrowers that shot into the caves, and we could hear people talking in Japanese, naturally. And then they covered it up with a bulldozer just so that entrance was closed. But of course, we didn't know that they had them all connected. I went by an area where the 3 Japanese had been shot. In fact, I went later on, and someone had turned a flamethrower on them after they were shot. I guess but anyway, I picked up a rifle and brought it back for a souvenir, and it was a 7.7. Had blood on the stock from the man that carried it, and I just selected that into the rifle. His DNA still there. give it to my grandson. I went to one of the Japanese Bettys that was wrecked there, one of the planes, and took a piece of aluminum and carved our division insignia, good old, well, I don't know, 5th Division on my hat, I guess. Yeah. Carved that into the stock of the rifle. We were ready to board the good old George F. Elliott ship again, and it was in harbor, and we had our ready to go aboard, but we'd turned in our ammunition, and we heard all this shooting up the beach, and about, probably up to 400 or 500 yards up the beach, why this group of Japanese were coming down shooting, and they hit our Pioneer Battalion stopped them, and an MP Battalion stopped them, but they had their ammo, of course, yet. And a good friend of mine, Bob Hansen, was wounded on the last day on IWO. Pioneer Battalion and the MP Battalion killed them all. But in the process, some of them were killed, or wounded anyway. I had 3 good friends close friends that were killed. Eugene W. Smith, we call him Schmitty, and Donald Schaefer. We call them by the last name most of the time, Schaefer and Tuck. Anyway, Smitty and Schaefer and I were on Liberty in the States, and we were going to a place called La Jolla. And by golly, they said, if you stand in this corner, you're going to see these buses going to La Jolla. And we stood there and didn't see any. And someone said, there were a lot of La Jolla buses going by, but we didn't see one that said La Jolla. But anyway, a couple of girls in a convertible picked us up, the 3 of us, and we went to the beach and spent the day together, and then we went our separate ways. But I had some good memories with Smitty and Schaefer, though. In fact, Schaefer sadly, he got married just before he shipped overseas, and turned out that his wife had married 2 other service people too. She was after the insurance, sadly. And I had another good friend, Al Dynica. We hadn't been around, didn't know what a homosexual was, and we were in San Francisco at the school, and Al would practice walking like some of the homosexuals did, and he wanted to show the people back home. And sadly, he lost both his legs on IWO, so he said he wasn't able to do that. But my experience with the Japanese people was great. I took food to one Japanese family. I couldn't even remember his name, Goroseki. He and his wife, and they had 5 children rather. And the oldest one was a teenage daughter. But they were just nice people. So we knew that it was not the people that we were battling, it was the government. Sasebo had been bombed several times, and it was pretty well destroyed, but when we got to Nagasaki, the only thing that was left there was they had a big concrete telephone headquarters, and it had real thick walls, and that's the only one I could remember standing there. And so our officers decided that would be a good place to have their headquarters. It had I'll tell this story too. It was kind of funny that they had a little Japanese girl that operated the elevator, and she'd bow to everyone that would go in and go up in the elevator, and I enjoyed being around Nagasaki a little bit. We went to the edges where it hadn't been damaged, you know. Of course, there was high radiation though there, but I remember I got pictures of me with some little Japanese kids at the Catholic Church. Well, we left Nagasaki on a ship called the Hansford, and we got into some terrible storms up in the North Sea. And I even heard that we cracked a hull on one of the hulls that they had to seal up where water got in. But we made it back, and I stayed in San Diego where we landed we were taking it back to Camp Pendleton, and I know several of us went on liberty unauthorized from there into San Diego, and all we had was our khaki clothes. But we'd hired a cab and went down and had a few drinks at the bars. Came back and went back through the hole in the fence that we'd left Camp Pendleton. It was great getting home. Yeah, this is original sand from when we were there. It was brought back, a fellow by the name of C.O. Crimeans brought a handful of sand, and this is part of it from when we did battle there. Yeah, this is a photograph of me taken over at Camp Tarawa in the Big Island of Hawaii during World War II. Yeah, this is a Japanese flag that I brought back from Iwo Jima, and a 7.7 rifle, Japanese rifle. I'm holding the rifle in the center. I hope that our nations can settle all the differences and stop the wars, and well, I don't think there's anybody that's been in a battle of any kind can not wish that there was not any more. Well, the only thing I think of, and I've thought it many times, if we could get the people that are causing the battle to do the fighting, why, then that would be fine. We get our presidents and rulers of all the nations that want to fight, let them do it themselves with each other. That's my original dog tag. I got it in 1943. Platoon 474, but it doesn't say that on it. It's got my 830-425, my serial number, and Protestant and blood type.